The Devil Among Us. It was a bright, sunny morning when Danny Miller arrived with his mother at the Grove, a small, idyllic, progressive community high school, nestled in the heart of the picturesque and affluent suburb of Ashwood Grove. The award-winning school, with only 63 hand-picked students, prided itself on fostering kindness, positive reinforcement, emotional intelligence, and woke ideals. Everything moved with a deliberate slowness, a careful kindness that had long forgotten the sharp edges of the world outside. The Grove epitomized this ethos, bright, clean, full of soft colors and even softer voices. Every wall was adorned with posters promoting peace, empathy, and love. It was a haven, but today all of that would change. Danny's mother had contacted the head teacher, Ms. Franklin, a few weeks previously, and explained they would be moving to the area in the fall. She had heard such wonderful things about the school and would like to arrange a taster day for her son, with the intention of him attending full-time if things worked out after their relocation. Once Danny had been introduced to the small team of 5 teaching staff, including the head teacher and the secretary, who doubled as the administrator, it was time for him to meet his fellow students and sit in on some classes for the day. Ms. Franklin was a dedicated, loving soul who taught the children about inclusivity, kindness and mindfulness. Every morning, they'd gather in a circle for feelings time, a ritual designed to help the children express their emotions. Every misstep was met with gentle guidance. Every disagreement was resolved with carefully mediated discussions. That is, until Danny arrived. Danny walked into the classroom quietly that morning, his appearance unassuming, almost too perfect. He looked like any other 16-year-old, maybe a little short for his age, with broad shoulders and bright, innocent eyes. His solid stature was topped with a mess of curly blonde hair. His choice of clothes enabled him to blend in. The only thing that may have stood out to the knowing eye would be his Farnham two-tone brogues, that some may have judged to be a little old for him. He liked to think that they gave him a 1920s gangster vibe. It was his favourite era. Otherwise, he had that all-American look, like the kid you'd see on a cereal box. The staff had been briefed about his pending move from another school in a different state, but no one asked too many questions and few details had been offered. In fact, it was all very vague, but the teachers assumed they would receive Danny's formal scholastic records once everything had been sorted and finalised. The head teacher had described his mother as young and sophisticated, the kind who probably quoted Nietzsche over dinner, but believed in giving their child free rein to express himself. From the names that his mother dropped in conversation, the family were clearly well connected and linked to old money. They were their kind of people, Ms. Franklin mused. Danny was quiet, a model student from the get-go, but there was something about him that didn't sit right. Maybe it was the too perfect smile or the way his eyes seemed to miss nothing, or maybe it was how he carried himself, almost like a predator sizing up prey. Something strange. He seemed to have a level of maturity and self-awareness that belied his apparent years. Mrs. Williams, a middle-aged teacher with kind eyes and a patient demeanour, greeted him warmly. "You must be Danny. Welcome to the Grove. We're delighted to have you here. Why don't you find a seat? We're just about to start." Danny nodded, flashing a polite smile. He chose a seat near the back, keeping his head down, looking the part of the shy new kid. But inside, he was already assessing his surroundings. The other kids glanced at him curiously, just quick sideways looks, but they returned to their gossip, Snapchatting under the desks and scribbling in notebooks. For the first half hour, Danny kept quiet. He listened to the routine chatter and felt the undercurrent of petty rivalries, insecurities, and the usual middle school hierarchy in place. But there was a tension here too, something he could exploit. The atmosphere of the school, the teaching methods and philosophy seemed ritualistic, and the dogmatic, cult-like rhetoric turned his stomach. Surreptitiously, he nodded to himself, pleased with his latest choice of school. The first session passed without incident. Mrs. Williams gave another uninspiring maths lesson, and the kids responded with the usual mix of boredom and mild nonchalance, but surprisingly, there had been no outburst to show, interest or disagreement from the class. They just accepted the spiel that was fed to them. They had all been mind-fucked, Danny thought as he sat quietly, his hands folded on the desk, his eyes flicking from one student to another, calculating, planning his move. He'd divide and conquer, and when the time was right, he'd toss in a rhetorical grenade. Mrs. Williams started to conclude her lecture and issue homework to the class when Danny grabbed a large bag of assorted candy from his backpack. "Mrs. Williams, would it be okay if I handed out some candy to my classmates at recess, as a thank you for making me so welcome?" She smiled. "Why, that's such a wonderful gesture, Danny. Thank you. Why don't you stand by the door and everyone can take some as they leave?" Danny did as instructed and thought what some of his classmates must be thinking at such a gesture. What a cocksucker, teacher's pet, a total douchebag. But it was a critical part of his plan. He had to get at least the majority of the kids to ingest the concoction of drugs that he had laced the sweets with. He needed to open their minds to the power of suggestion, increase their paranoia and tendency for aggressive and violent behaviour. Basically, he needed to transform these lovely little fuckwits into narcissistic little cunts. He'd researched and developed such a formulation, a combination of tasty, natural ingredients long used by the food and confectionery industries, specifically designed to hit the bliss point, the perfect balance of sugar, salt, and fat that triggers maximum pleasure in the brain. This, combined with a little pharmacology, a mixture of modern designer narcotics, had proven to be a winning formula. It was guaranteed to transmogrify even the most angelic darling into Satan incarnate. The bell rang for morning recess. Everyone grabbed their stuff and headed out. All of the kids grabbed a handful of candy as they exited the door. These little angels were in for a real treat. Some went to the canteen, others to a small common room that had a vending machine. Planning ahead, Danny had already dropped off bags of his enhanced candy in each location, with a note saying, "Please help yourself." He offered the 2 remaining bits of candy to Mrs. Williams, then sloped off to see the school administrator, Ms. Garcia. Her office was tucked away behind reception. The sign on the door read, "Administration, strictly no admittance." Reining in his smile, he respectfully knocked on the door and waited for her to invite him into the office. She smiled. "Hello, Danny? How can I help you?" "Everything is okay, I hope." Danny did his best new kid impression, glancing down at the floor before beaming a winning smile, the type reserved for your favourite auntie just before Christmas or your birthday. He reached into his backpack and removed a Carlo's Bakery cake box. He offered it to Ms. Garcia in a supplicative manner. "Ms. Garcia, please would you take these to the staff room and share them with your colleagues? It's my way of thanking you all for making me feel so welcome in your wonderful school." Oh my, what a wonderful gesture, Danny, and so well timed. "We do love to have a little cake with our morning coffee here at the Grove." Danny blushed a little as he turned and walked out of the office, all part of the act. "Damn, I'm good," he thought as he observed Ms. Garcia close and latch her office door. He retrieved a small bunch of keys from his pocket, the same keys that were on Ms. Garcia's desk a few moments earlier. When the corridor was empty, he slipped back into her office and went to work. Danny had pre-ordered the cake from Carlo's online and had it delivered to a click-and-collect locker in a local shopping mall. After collecting the packaged cake from the locker, he slipped into a mother and baby changing room, placed the box on the prep table, removed the 5 fancy cupcakes, and skillfully injected them with midazolam, a fast-acting benzodiazepine used for sedation, commonly in medical procedures. It induces relaxation and with the correct dose can quickly cause unconsciousness. He repacked the cakes, retied the bow, slipped the box into his backpack and pulled up his hoodie. Exiting the changing room, he walked back to the car and headed for school. Danny checked his watch and sat behind Ms. Garcia's desk. He inserted a thumb drive into the desktop computer and opened up the school security application. This controlled and logged all video from the networked cameras that were strategically installed around the school inside and out. He then ran his own bespoke program from the thumb drive, which quickly overwrote the day's recorded video on the computer and cloud storage with white noise and suspended further recording until the system reset at 800 hours the following morning. He removed and pocketed the thumb drive. Then, from the bunch of keys, he found the one to unlock the filing cabinet, marked student records and scanned the names on the 63 personnel files and report cards, looking for who he believed would be the most psychologically vulnerable to the next phase of his plan. He grabbed the 4 files and slipped them into his backpack. He reset everything, put the keys back on the desk and stealthily exited the office, latching the door behind him and quickly headed down the corridor to the small library. He found a quiet, secluded spot and figured he had about 20 minutes to doctor the school reports. He had already decided on the various narratives for the kids. He just needed to write them on the report cards. Once completed, he headed down to the staff room, and as planned, the staff were slumped in their loungers, unconscious. Before he exited the sanctuary, he headed over to Miss Davenport, a young teacher, the prettiest by far. Grinning, he unbuttoned her formal-looking blouse, reached in and cupped one of her breasts. Gently, he thumbed her nipple before easing her breast out of her soft cotton bra. He let it hang exposed. Chuckling, he exited the room. His next port of call was the janitor's cupboard, in the hope of finding some tools. He was in luck. There was a small toolbox on the floor, and as he'd predicted, it was full of hand tools. Various screwdrivers, a claw and ball pain hammers, an adjustable wrench, a large utility knife, a crowbar, an assortment of spanners and sockets, and a ubiquitous pipe wrench. He reached in and grabbed it before heading to the classroom, where he pulled the doctored report cards from his backpack and placed them on the appropriate desks, open for the world to see and read. Despite the apparent woke environment and ethos, the Grove was fundamentally the same as most other schools. The same fragile order waiting to be broken. It just needed a trigger. A gentle push to upset the equilibrium and kapow. The shit would hit the fan. The magic medicine that he had laced the sweets with should already be kicking in and taking effect. It was time to find out as he moved back into the corridor. He saw his first opportunity in Maddie Cole, one of the more popular girls, leaning against the lockers, scrolling through her phone. She was known for being sharp-tongued, always ready to tear someone down with a cutting remark. "Hey, Maddie," Danny said as he walked up to her. She looked up, her expression bored. "What do you want, butt plug? Emma was talking about you in the common room. She said you were looking a little rough today. Said you must have sucked too much of your brother's cock last night." Maddie's eyes narrowed. "Emma said that? That fucking swamp donkey." Danny shrugged. "Yeah, that bitch needs slapping." Maddie's face twisted with anger. Emma had been her best friend since they were little, but it wasn't the first time she'd heard whispers like that. The insecurity gnawed at her. Without another word, she turned and stormed down the hallway toward the common room, ready for confrontation. Emma was talking and laughing with a friend, carefree and looking very happy. This pissed Maddie off even more. She was probably spreading further lies about her and her brother. Maddie stopped a little distance from Emma, peeled off one of her trainers. Stepping forward, she shifted her weight, coiling her body like a spring, eyes locked on the target, Emma's face. Her arm and entire body snapped forward, arm whipping round in one fluid motion. The trainer impacted the side of Emma's face with an explosive force. The crack of bone and the splitting of flesh was only preempted by Maddie's power grunt. Emma's feet left the ground as she crashed over a nearby table. Danny turned and slipped away like a greased eel. He headed to the canteen to have some more fun. He'd seen how Chloe and Sophie both looked with teenage longing at Jake, a tall, good-looking kid with a trendy haircut and the air of an aloof 19th century poet who dressed too feminine for his liking. But what the fuck? He saw an opportunity to cause a little friction, and it would all help his mission. He walked over to Chloe, who was standing chatting to another girl. There was a small group of kids nearby, arguing over the last few pieces of magic candy. With a well-practiced nervous stutter, he asked, "Chloe, will you go out with me?" Chloe scoffed. "What, me? Go out with a dweeb?" She sniggered. "No way. Get lost, loser." She turned to continue her conversation with the other girl, ignoring him. "Oh," he sighed. I just thought that since Sophie was now dating Jake, you'd have no one to hang with. So I thought." Chloe froze for a moment before spinning around to glare at him. "What?" she barked. "Don't talk rubbish. He doesn't fancy her." Looking sheepish, Danny backed away. "It's just that I saw them sucking face behind the gym only a few minutes ago." "Sorry, my bad," he said with a faint smile. Chloe squealed like a stuck pig and stormed off to find Sophie. "She's in the bathroom," Danny shouted after her. Slamming the door open, her fists clenched, Chloe saw Sophie looking in the mirror, reapplying her lip gloss. "You think you're real cute, don't you?" Chloe spat, her voice cold and sharp like broken glass. Sophie glanced up, eyes narrowing. What? What's your problem, Chloe? My problem? You! Chloe's voice rose. You know I like Jake, but you went behind my back and asked him out. You're supposed to be my friend. He's mine, not yours. He wants me. Not some skinny, dry, flat-chested bitch. Sophie, confused, slammed the lip gloss down on the counter. What the hell are you talking about? I never. Don't lie, you skanky cow, Chloe screeched. You were seen kissing behind the gym. Sophie stepped forward, blood boiling with fury at the lie. Her best friend, unprovoked, had just drawn first blood, and it hurt. Despite her accusations not being true, she just wanted to hit back, to hurt Chloe like she'd hurt her. Her face inches from Chloe's. At least Jake sees me. You're just bitter because you're invisible to all the boys. No one sees you. You're like a ghost, sad and lonely. Yes, he's mine, and we did a whole lot more than kiss. Chloe's anger burst into a flood of tears. You're pathetic, Chloe screeched. You're nothing without me, and everyone knows it. Maybe I'm tired of hanging with a loser. Jake asked me, not you, Sophie gloated. In a blind rage, Chloe shoved Sophie, slamming her head against the mirror, cracking it, shards cutting into her cheek. Fuck you, and then stormed out into the corridor, followed by an insanely vengeful Sophie who had blood streaming down her cheek. Danny strained to contain his delight at the outcome, watching from the safety of a shadowed recess in the corridor. Smug as his theatrics resulted in critical acclaim. Lambs to the slaughter, he whispered. Alex's phone pinged as he opened his locker to swap the baseball mitt for books needed for his next class. It pinged again, then another half-dozen times in quick succession, before emitting an almost constant stream of pings, sounding more like a pinball machine with a stuck paddle. He retrieved the phone from a deep pocket in his baggy surf shorts. The screen opened to a meme of someone jacking off in a toilet cubicle. Initially he laughed, but then realised that the meme had his face on it. What the... He heard the roaring laughter up and down the corridor. Alex slammed his locker shut, his face flushed with embarrassment and anger. The meme was generic but had been enhanced using AI, and besides he never wanked off at school. Well, almost never. He preferred the privacy of his bedroom and the fact that he could use his multi-screen computer gaming setup to luxuriate in a porn fest. It was almost as good as a tit wank, he always thought. Not that he'd ever had one. He spotted Tom at the end of the hall, laughing with a few other kids. Without thinking, Alex stormed over. Think it's funny, huh? Alex growled, shoving Tom's shoulder. Tom blinked, taken aback. What's your deal, man? You posted that meme of me like a coward, made me look like a joke in front of everyone. Tom scoffed. Dude, it wasn't me. It's just a meme, just a joke. Chill out. A joke? Alex's voice cracked. You humiliated me, Tom. It's on the fucking internet. You're acting like a baby, Tom said, crossing his arms. If you can't take a joke, that's your problem. And it still wasn't me, although the lady doth protest too much, methinks. Tom chuckled and turned away, giving him the finger. Alex's fists tightened. You cunt, he shouted as he swung a right hook which connected square with Tom's ear. Tom, stunned, fell to his knees, shaking his head, and in shock at the attack, he glanced up, just in time to see the large, hardback textbook before it struck his face. Everything went dark as Tom's head folded to the floor, blood oozing from his ear and nose. Danny headed for the common room. He knew that Tyler Jenkins, a lanky boy with a mop of brown hair who had a loud mouth and a short fuse, would be there holding court. Tyler ruled over a small group of boys who followed him around like disciples, but it was clear his authority was based more on bluster than respect. Danny smiled to himself. In this place, anyone who didn't have their shoelaces tied was a rebel. As Danny approached Tyler, he could see the empty bag of magic candy on the floor. Hey, Danny said, his voice soft but firm enough to get Tyler's attention. Tyler raised an eyebrow, looking him over with a sneer. What do you want? Danny smiled, that innocent, almost angelic smile. Ben over there, he said, nodding toward a smaller boy sitting a few tables away, surrounded by a mixed bunch of oddballs. The outcast kids that don't fit into your main alpha groups. Kids that range across the IQ scale, from dumb shits to borderline autistic. That's not to say that they're not handy with their fists or cry at the first taste of blood. From experience, these were most likely the kids that would join the SEALs, Delta Force, or a crack SWAT unit. He'd found it was always best to steer clear of people like them, irrespective of age. Tyler glanced in Ben's direction, confused. What about him? Well, he and his little creepy retard friends have been talking shit about you and your squad, he said, struggling to hold his laughter in. They said how you were nothing without your boys. Said you're just a loudmouth who talks big but can't back it up. A bunch of pussies. Tyler's face flushed with rage. He said that? Danny nodded. I didn't want to get involved, but I thought you should know. Where I'm from, that's fighting talk. But I guess here in Wokesville, it's acceptable to be disrespected, and then lube up and turn the other butt cheek. Tyler's fists clenched. He stood abruptly, shoving his chair back and marching toward Ben. The common room buzzed with tension as the scene unfolded. Tyler grabbed Ben by the collar, yanking him to his feet. You talking shit about me, huh? You think I'm all mouth? Tyler spat, his face inches from Ben's. Ben's eyes took on a glazed, vacant look. Not a look of fear. His face was emotionless, other than the slight curling of his mouth. It was more a look of, I'm gonna introduce you to a level of pain you never knew existed. Mama's boy. The two boys faced off. Their eyes stared deep into each other's soul. Tyler's throat suddenly became dry. He felt his left eye twitch nervously. He swallowed, wondering whether this showdown was such a good idea. But it was too late now. Ben's head shot forward like a viper striking. Tyler didn't see the move. He hadn't even seen a slight tell that most kids have when they tense their necks before delivering a headbutt. There was a loud crack as his nose exploded. He fell to the floor like a poleaxed bull. Ouch, Danny thought. I may have overdone it with the methamphetamine in the magic candy. All hell then kicked off. Cliques fighting cliques. Old established cliques and new cliques formed naturally in the heat of battle. Danny smiled to himself with that same detached smile as he watched it all unfold and the chaos spread. But he wasn't finished yet. Danny had spent most of the day planting seeds of discontent, anger and bitterness in the minds of the other students. As he walked back to class, he could hear raised voices echoing from the corridor. He couldn't help but grin. This was so easy. These kids had been controlled since the day they'd hatched. They had been treated like little kids in a Disney movie or some perverse fucking Shangri-La. And now their drug-fueled hormones and angst were bursting through. They were ready to bust Freaksville wide open. Ignoring the shouts and screams coming from the corridor and connecting rooms, he headed to reception and grabbed the microphone for the PA system. Clearing his throat, he pressed the talk button. His voice was no longer that of a young, pubescent boy. There was a rich tone, a maturity about his diction. All students must report to Ms. Franklin's class immediately. He paused. Now, you little deaf fuckers. He released the talk button and headed to the staff room. The teachers were now conscious, but confused, wandering about like zombies. He approached Ms. Franklin and with a desperate tone in his voice, Please, Ms. Some of the kids are fighting in your class. Can you stop them? He asked. She half walked and half staggered towards her classroom, followed by the other teachers who looked worried and confused in equal measure. Miss Davenport seemed unaware that one of her breasts was exposed as she joined the others and staggered towards the classroom. Danny pushed ahead and raced to the group of kids now cramming into Ms. Franklin's room. The 4 students, key to the final stage of his plan, stood by their desks, report cards in hand, their faces contorted with fury. Danny's smile widened. He had done it. He had ignited their buried anger, frustration and resentment for the system and those that represent it. Their narcissism flared, taking control of their actions as if he had flipped a switch. Years of studying psychiatry, particularly in child and adolescent psychiatry and psychopharmacology, had proven invaluable. Danny had mastered the art of spotting the subtle signs of psychopathy, honing his ability to manipulate emotions with precision. He knew exactly which triggers would spark psychotic behavior. In peer groups like this, flipping their mental states from rational to irrational was disturbingly easy. The class simmered with barely contained tension, like a powder keg on the verge of exploding. Aidan's gaze fell on the report card sitting on his desk, a knot tightening in his stomach. As he reached for it, Chloe's hand darted out, snatching it away with a grin. Without hesitation, she began reading it aloud, her voice cutting through the classroom like a blade. Aidan has once again proven to be a significant disappointment this term. His academic performance remains consistently below expectations, suggesting a concerning lack of potential for improvement. If he's fortunate, he might one day find himself working a modest job, such as a bagger at Costco or a pot jockey. His previous athletic ability has completely deserted him, and even if we allow him to remain at the Grove, he will certainly not be making the first team in the upcoming season. Overall, Aidan has failed to live up to the expectations set by both his parents and his more driven peers. This is particularly disheartening given the extensive support and leniency extended by the teaching staff, including after-hours coaching to boost his grades. Truly, the outcome is disappointing. With a cold smile, she looked up at Aidan. Signed, Principal Franklin. Aidan, trembling with rage, ripped the report card from Chloe's grasp, her smug, gloating smile only fanning the flames of his fury. "Bollocks!" he yelled, his voice cracking with anger. "This is fucking bullshit! I'll show you how good I am at sports by putting my fist through your face, you lying cunt!" Ms. Franklin froze, her face drained of colour. "Aidan, you need to calm down. Calm down." Aidan's fists tightened as he cut her off, his voice a furious growl. "You've been trying to get me kicked out of this place. You think I don't know what you've been saying behind my back? I haven't..." Ms. Franklin started, but Aidan didn't let her finish. Grabbing the nearest textbook, he hurled it with full force. It slammed against the blackboard with a deafening thud, narrowly missing her. "Why don't you shut the fuck up for once, huh?" Aidan snarled, his voice thick with venom. The class erupted, banging on desks in chaotic solidarity. The mob erupted in cheers, surging forward to surround the teachers who stood frozen, their faces etched with shock and disbelief. Ben's voice cut through the chaotic noise, holding Maddie's report card with quiet satisfaction as he read aloud. "Mrs. Williams has written to your parents about your poor grades. She's planning to fail you this semester and use your photo in her school-wide campaign against immorality. Apparently she's been telling the other teachers that you spend too much time chasing boys." He turned to look directly at Maddie. "Too much time riding cock and not enough time on your coursework, is that true, Maddie?" Maddie shot to her feet, her hand trembling as she pointed an accusatory finger at Mrs. Williams. "Yeah, I know you've been talking to my parents. You're a pathetic bitch. Maybe if you spent less time meddling and more time getting laid, you wouldn't be so uptight. Or do you prefer your me time in the janitor's closet, rubbing one out?" She snarled. The chaotic scene spiraled as more students joined in, hurling books and papers across the room, their shouts blending into a cacophony of rebellion. Desks rattled as fists banged against them. The classroom transformed into a riotous battleground. Aidan stood at the centre of it all, his chest heaving, eyes wild with anger. Ms. Franklin took a cautious step forward, her voice shaking as she tried to regain control. "Enough! Everyone sit down. Now!" she commanded, though the edge of panic betrayed her. But the class was far beyond her authority. Liam Thompson, who had previously been seen as a teacher's pet, had been silent up until now, stood up on his chair, arms raised. "I've had enough of being manipulated and controlled by these slimy have-a-nice-day motherfuckers, pushing their snake oil cult down our throats. Well, it's time we showed them who we really are." A cheer erupted from the students, their frustration boiling over into something raw, uncontainable. Aidan, still burning with rage, glanced at Ben, Maddie, Chloe, Liam, and then at Ms. Franklin. She took an involuntary step backwards to mesh with her colleagues, their backs pressed hard against the blackboard. They all looked on in terror as the four children slowly advanced to the front of the group. Ms. Franklin tried to maintain control, but her voice faltered as she spoke. "Remember our creed: mutual respect, love, and tolerance." She tried to swallow, but her throat was dry. Danny watched it all with quiet satisfaction. He'd done it. He'd achieved what he'd set out to do. He'd turned their world upside down. Kids against kids, and ultimately the kids against their teachers, their oppressors. But there was still one final act to play. Danny reached down by the side of his desk and lifted up the battered old toolbox he'd taken earlier from the janitor's cupboard. He stepped forward, dropping the toolbox on Mrs. Williams' dishevelled desk. He reached in and grabbed the ball-peen hammer and the pipe wrench and offered them to Aidan and Maddie. "What the hell are we supposed to do with those?" Aidan asked, his voice low and dangerous. Danny smiled, holding up the hammer. "Just thought you might need them." "For what?" Maddie asked, her eyes narrowing as the sinister smile grew on her lips. Danny's grin widened. "For her," he said, nodding toward Ms. Franklin, who stood frozen at the back of the room, her face drained of colour, wet with tears and petrified as the mob cheered. The kids hesitated for a moment, unsure of how far they were willing to go. But the anger, the resentment that had been building all day was too strong to ignore. Danny had planted the seeds, and now they were ready to bloom. He repeated this action, giving the crowbar and claw hammer to Chloe and Alex. Liam stepped up and grabbed the adjustable wrench. Sophie's hand reached out and took the utility knife, flicking a quick glance at Chloe. Danny tipped the remaining screwdrivers and oddments out onto the desk. "Help yourselves," he said to no one in particular. After a second's hesitation, a dozen hungry hands reached in and grabbed what was left. The other kids joined in, arming themselves with whatever they could find. Scissors, pencils, anything sharp or dangerous. Some smashed furniture using chair and table legs as clubs. Ms. Franklin backed up, her voice trembling as she pleaded with them to stop. "Please, I don't know what's gotten into you, but we can talk about this, we can—" "Shut up!" Aidan shouted, swinging the hammer and smashing it into the desk in front of her. The sound echoed through the room, and the rest of the kids closed in. They attacked with the savage glee of children who had never known real consequences. They had been manipulated and controlled all of their lives, told what to do and when to do it. They didn't stop to think about what they were now doing, didn't pause to consider the weight of their actions. They had been pushed too far, and now they wanted revenge. Danny watched from the sidelines, his smile never fading. He didn't need to participate. He had already won. Ms. Franklin's screams echoed down the hallways, as did those of Mrs. Williams, Miss Davenport, Ms. Garcia and Jason Rodriguez, their music and drama teacher. But no one came to help. By the time it was over, the classroom was a wreck of overturned desks, broken glass and blood. The kids stood in a circle around the limp bodies, panting and wide-eyed, their hands and clothing drenched with blood. For a moment there was silence, broken only by the sound of their laboured breathing. Danny quietly slipped out of the room unnoticed. He walked down the empty hallway, his footsteps light and unhurried. Outside, the afternoon sun was burning high in the sky, casting harsh shadows across the quiet suburban street. Mrs. Miller was waiting for him in the car parked just down the block. As he strolled carefree towards the car, he reflected on his formative years at school. How he'd been taunted by students and teachers alike. He had been born with Laron syndrome. Despite his age, he looked like a typical 16-year-old. No one would have ever guessed that he had turned 29. Unless, of course, they were familiar with the condition and its effect of delayed aging. He smiled and chuckled to himself at having cashed in some of the debt owed to him by the society that had taunted and rejected him for most of his life. Danny climbed into the passenger seat, buckling his seatbelt, as his wife turned around to kiss him on the mouth. "How was your first day, sweetheart?" she asked with a knowing smile. He grinned. It was great. As the car pulled away from the curb, he glanced out the window, watching the school disappear behind him. His work here was done, but there were plenty of other schools, plenty of other teachers, and plenty of other students to incite. The fruit was ripe for the picking, and dissension was in the air across the nation.